Righto, welcome everybody to another Ocean Protect webinar. Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Oh, very good. Look, I'm always well. I'm on the plants, baby. So what can I tell you? I don't get sick. I'm aging amazingly. So look, and thanks for everyone who's dialed in already today. This is another extremely popular webinar. And I think we can give all the credit to the amazing technical expertise and communication skills of one Daniel Ryder. It's a real interesting mix of registration. So a whole bunch of council staff from various councils across Australia, and a whole bunch of individuals from private industry as well, which is great to see. But we'll give people a little bit of time to sort of come through the virtual turnstiles, but just a few little quick plugs on various upcoming things. Number one, the Ocean Protect podcast, I think it's 130 plus episodes down now, and our very own Daniel Ryder featured in a recent one. Super popular episode, Daniel, but it has to be said it was less popular than Craig Fairbaugh's podcast. For those who don't know Craig, he's a former punk rock star. He's actually played with the Juliette Lewis and the Licks, Plus 44, etc., the Mercy Killers, but he's an environmental engineer working for Contact, and he's actually presented a couple of our Ocean Protect webinars. So if you're wondering if it's the same Craig Fairbaugh that you probably listened to on an Ocean Protect webinar, it is the same Craig Fairbaugh. And we had 2,000 listens in just 2 hours. I haven't looked at it since, but Craig's episode is super popular. And obviously we've had another more recent one with CSIRO. CSIRO's Justine Barrett talking about microplastics, which has been it was really interesting. But taking nothing away from Daniel's podcast, it was amazing too. They're all amazing. Okay. But look, a quick event that particularly people in Southeast Queensland might be keen to attend, the Southeast Queensland, Stormwater Queensland Sustainability Summit. And this event, I've included a link to this in the chat if you'd like to find out more and register. That is on next week. So if you're keen to head along, please do so. That's a Stormwater Queensland event. And I should point out a link to the Ocean podcast is also in the chat as well. So feel free to jump on and subscribe, give us a rating, all that sort of cool stuff, and listen in. Another event coming up is the Sea Shepherd Australia Ocean Defence Tour. That's next month, and Ocean Protect are a sponsor of that event. Look, it's all the cool stuff, talking about how to save our oceans through various activities through Sea Shepherd Australia, and these guys are cool cats. So get along and support them if you can. Also, another really interesting event coming up. I say that because I'm biased, because I'm presenting at it as well. But that's next month in Brisbane at the Victoria Park Golf Club. And that's a face-to-face interactive panel discussion event talking about bioretention systems. Again, the link to buy tickets is in the chat for that one. And it's myself, I think Paul Dabowski, Ben Peneleric, formerly from Water by Design, and Tim Davies, formerly of Brisbane City Council, all panelists at that event. Highly interactive breakfast session. And just a reminder, and I always get to ask this question, if you miss the chat, if you missed today's webinar, or if you need to, you need to duck off a little bit early, you can access the webinar recordings and also the slides at the Ocean Protect website /webinars. So, and I think there's about 15 or 16 or so recordings and slides now. So if you're keen for a deep dive into all things technical stormwater stuff, feel free to do so. We get just as many people watching it later than we do registering and watching it live. Obviously, when it comes to watching it live though, they're the best seats in the house. And just a reminder that if you do have any questions you'd like to ask Daniel today, please put them in the Q&A panel. So again, just if you have a question for Daniel, please put it in the Q&A. If you've got a comment or whatever, feel free to put it in the chat. But ideally, put any sort of correspondence in the Q&A, because that way we can track it and make sure those questions are answered appropriately. It just makes our job a lot easier if that's possible. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'll let Daniel take over. I've been told some of the links haven't come up, so I'll I'll just resubmit those, but there is a bunch of links I've put in the chat, but if you haven't seen them, just let me know. But we probably should give Daniel, I feel as though it's always an adage where you say, oh, this person needs no introduction, but kind of still need to introduce sometimes. But look, Daniel Rotter is the Water Sensitive Urban Design Compliance Officer at Blacktown City Council, and he has a bachelor degree in environmental earth sciences and environmental management. He's got accreditation in microplastic assessment, I'm guessing through OSMAPS. And he's also a qualified coral reef research officer diver. So that's pretty cool. But look, Daniel has been a key part of the Blacktown City Council Water Sensitive Design Compliance Program. And it is, to the best of my knowledge, the first of its kind in Australia. We know this is a big issue, ensuring the appropriate maintenance of stormwater treatment assets, and Blacktown City Council are leading the charge in improving activities in this space. So it's an amazing sort of subject matter. Daniel's presented this at a few events. More recently, the Stormwater Symposium the South Australian Stormwater Symposium in Adelaide virtually, and he presented at the Urban Water Symposium in Hobart a little bit before that. But the wonders of modern technology, we can do it virtually. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and I'll pass it over to Daniel. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Brad, for that introduction. So as Brad said, I'm the Water Sensitive Urban Design Compliance Officer at Blacktown City Council, and my job is to coordinate the delivery of Blacktown's WSUD compliance program, which is looking at enforcing the legal maintenance requirements on private properties with WSUD systems. And so, as Brad has said, I've been doing a lot of talks about the WSUD compliance program over the past, I say, 18 months. And so today I'm going to be doing something a bit different, where I'm looking at sharing kind of ideas on things that councils can start doing now to help start working on their own WSUD compliance program. And so before I get started, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're all on today and the continuous connection to land and sea. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So this compliance program is looking at enforcing compliance on private WSUD. And when I'm talking about private WSUD, I'm talking about WSUD assets and systems that are on private property under private management and have some sort of legal obligation to maintain and manage those systems. So these are assets and systems that council do not own. These are privately owned assets. Now, what these assets can look like can be a range of things. So we have the water conservation ones like rainwater tanks, water quality ones like biofilters and filter cartridges, and detention ones like OSD. However, the types will vary from council to council, state to state, really depending on what's approved within a council. And so why we care about the maintenance of private WSUD is for a range of reasons. Firstly, they can help with localized flood mitigation. So through properly functioning detention assets like OSD, it can help improve flood mitigation within a city. So it's important to have those assets maintained so that that benefit can be achieved. Then there's water security. So through assets like rainwater tanks, they can help with water conservation by decreasing the demand on potable water, as it can, the non-potable water can be used from these rainwater tanks to water gardens, for toilet flushing, those sorts of activities. And so again, it's important to have those assets maintained so that we can get that benefit. Next, there's waterway protection. So through a lot of the assets, there are water quality benefits. And so through that, that's reducing the amount of pollution entering our waterways, which helps protect it. And so again, by maintaining these assets effectively and appropriately, it means that we can get this benefit. Next, I would also say that there's often a majority of treatment within a catchment is on private property. Again, this is going to vary from council to council, but there are publicly owned assets and there's privately owned assets, and we need to be looking at those privately owned assets, as there are a lot of them across Australia. And then finally, I'd also say that evidence continues to mount that there are low rates of maintenance, in some cases of interference occurring. So there needs to be some sort of program in place that is looking at enforcing maintenance on these properties. Now, this program has evolved quite a bit since its implementation in 2012, where it started off as an inspection-based program that was being managed by an Excel spreadsheet. So the WSUD compliance team were going out and doing inspections to determine the condition of assets. However, in 2018, 2019, the program was reviewed and it was found that the legal enforceability was severely limited and that an inspection-based program wasn't practical due to the large number of properties and assets that would be within this program. So things had to change. So at the end of 2019, we started working on a new program, which has seen significant changes. The legal foundation was thoroughly reworked, and so this is the conditions of consent for developments and also the positive covenant and restriction on the use of land for those developments too. And those are the documents we use to enforce compliance. And I'll talk about them a bit later. Then there's a development of the WSUD compliance management system, which is a system that allows us to track compliance at the property level, but also the system level. And that's really important because there are a large number of assets and properties that are going to be within this program. So there needed to be an easy way for us to manage at both levels. And then also there was the shift from an inspection-based model to an owner reporting model. This doesn't mean that we won't be doing inspections, so there's still a critical component of the program. However, by reducing the amount of time we're doing inspections, it increases our capacity to enforce compliance on a larger scale. Now, this program has taken some big steps since its implementation in 2012, and at the moment we're in a trial of this new version of the program. However, we're still early on in this journey and we still have a lot more to go, and over the next coming years, it's going to be evolving quite a bit more too. So the situation at the moment is we are trialing this new version of the compliance program, which is looking at enforcing maintenance on private WSUD. And because it's in a trial, it means that the model hasn't been properly tested yet, so it's being tested at the moment, but it's not finished yet. And over the next year or two, we'll be kind of evolving and adapting it depending on the feedback and the outcomes of this trial. But also the materials for the industry are not ready. I am looking to work on a manual and a bit of a process map to help people understand how Blacktown does what we do. And so at the moment, those aren't ready. But that doesn't mean that councils and other groups don't have to wait for us to finish our trial and what we're doing. There are things that others can start doing today. Firstly, I would recommend determine the organizational interest. Start asking yourself questions, start asking your team questions, start asking your organization questions. For example, would your organization want to do such a thing? There's no point putting a lot of time and effort right now into this if your organization won't support doing this. So that's an important question and something to figure out early on. Next, I would say, are there other environmental compliance programs? If there are other compliance programs looking at environmental things within the council, you can look to them and see how they're doing compliance and what they've done to get to where they are and what they're going through at the moment, because by learning the lessons about the obstacles and the barriers and the things that they had to do to get to where they are now, can help you speed up the process of implementing your own WSUD compliance program. I'd also say, where would it fit within the organisation? So have a think about what team it would be within the council or the organisation. For example, at Blacktown, I'm in the waterways team within asset design. However, for other councils, it might be some sort of compliance team, might be an environment team or some sort of development team that this program would be run by. Next, what would compliance look like? Building upon looking at the other environmental compliance programs or just any sort of compliance programs in the council, you can kind of get some ideas of how your council approaches compliance. And so you can start thinking about whether that's going to be a lot of fines or maybe a bit more of an educational approach to help people comply with the legal requirements. And then finally, I'd also say that what is the impact of not doing this program? So councils and all sorts of organizations have goals and strategies and plans and projects happening right now that they're working towards. And it would be good to start thinking about, if you don't do this program, what does it mean for councils' goals and other projects? Because if you can find ways to link a WSUD compliance program with that, that gives more strength to your push for a compliance program to occur at your council. Next, I would say to start determining the type of program. So firstly, what type of assets will it include? So in terms of category for assets, will it look at water quality, water conservation, and or detention assets or something else? Or will it be looking at private and or public assets? For Blacktown, we're looking at private assets at the moment. However, who knows, maybe sometime in the future, we'll be looking at public as well. And in terms of types of assets, I'd also say, look at the types of assets that have been historically and currently accepted within the council. By creating that list, it makes it a bit easier when you get to starting the compliance program, because you know what's required in terms of what assets are within the council and that you need to be enforcing compliance on. Next, kind of building a bit on what I was saying on the previous slide, would be looking at who would be in charge of such a program. Would you have a dedicated officer, such as Blacktown Council having a WSUD compliance officer and a WSUD compliance support officer? Or would those roles and duties of this program maybe be distributed amongst a few different people within the organisation? Next, would it look at historical or present developments, or both? For Blacktown, we're looking at both historical and present developments, so going forward, we're getting those as well. And I guess the thing to note here is historical developments can be difficult for some organisations depending on how much data they've been collecting over the years. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're deciding to go historically. But also, what type of properties will this program look at? Will it look at industrial, commercial, residential, or some other sort of property? For us, we are looking at industrial right now. That's our primary focus. However, we are doing a bit of work with the other types. But the aim is to, over time, move towards looking at the other types of properties as well. Next, I would say to figure out how development occurs at the organisation. Now, this is going to be beneficial for all sorts of other programs, not just a WSUD compliance program, but figuring out how development occurs within the organisation is a great thing to be doing. Because in terms of a WSUD compliance program, a range of development documentation and information will be required throughout the development process for the program to work in the operational stage. So you need to know how development happens. So start thinking about the different stages of development and what teams and individuals are involved within that, so that when you get to implementing a program and trying to collect data and documents, you know which teams you need to be working with to get that information. Next, one of the important things I'd recommend doing as soon as you can is to start collecting WSUD data. Now, when I'm saying WSUD data, I'm talking about property addresses, asset details, owner details, relevant conditions of consent. Any sort of data that you can start collecting today or as soon as you can, because the more data you have when you start a WSUD compliance program will make it a lot easier to implement. Now, even if you don't go starting this for 10, 20 years, having data from today or from when you start collecting it will make that job a lot easier. But also say if you're looking at historical developments that you're wanting to include into the program, an idea of getting a list of properties with WSUD assets is to reach out to asset suppliers such as Ocean Protect and Spell and other organizations like that and get the information from them, and you can kind of build upon that as well. Next thing would be to review your conditions of consent at the moment. So for the WSUD compliance program, we have a range of conditions that require developers to do a range of things and provide certain information before they get their occupation or subdivision certificate. And so to speed up time and also helping with historical enforcement would be understanding what conditions of consent you have in place right now. So looking at things that relate to stormwater or drainage, things about protecting the environment, or maybe something about not polluting. And so by understanding what you have now, you can see what you can build upon or improve upon, or maybe there is a lot of double up and you could maybe increase the efficiency of developments within your council. Then the next thing would be to determine your legal options. So this on the screen is a screenshot of our positive covenant for a WSUD system. And so for a compliance program to work, a compliance program needs the ability to legally enforce compliance. And so this is going to vary from council to council, state to state. But start thinking about what gives you the grounds to legally enforce compliance. This is another thing that will impact your ability to enforce compliance on historical developments. But could you use covenants like Blacktown Council, or maybe some sort of act, development control plan, conditions of consent, or some sort of legislation? Now, I know Brad's talked about this sort of legal side of things before, so I'm sure he can maybe add a little bit at the end of this presentation if people are interested. But the thing is just there are a range of different ways that people can enforce compliance. And so starting to have that discussion and thoughts right now is a good thing to start doing. Now, just to kind of help a bit understand our legal grounds for our program, we have, I'm just going to go through them a bit. So there's the positive covenant, which is again on the screenshot. And if people are wanting to read that properly, you can find that on our website as well. And so with this covenant, this is what gives us the ability to enforce compliance. And so within this, it gives a definition to a WSUD system so that everyone understands what this legal document is in relation to. So that's at the bottom of the document. Then it defines the owner's responsibilities to the WSUD system. And so it talks about how they have to maintain it and act on written notices from council and that sort of stuff. Next, it requires owners to act on any written instruction from council, so we can send them letters and emails to tell them that they need to start doing maintenance, reporting to us, or something like that. It also authorizes council to inspect, so this gives us the legal grounds to inspect a property. We should be giving them notice in most cases. However, if there is an emergency, this document does give us the legal right to enter in an emergency to check out the WSUD system. It also authorizes council to compel works, so we can tell them that they need to rectify an issue, to do maintenance, or do something to help make sure their WSUD system is working properly. It also gives council legal rights to recover costs if they have to carry out the works for them, because if the property owner does not carry out the works that we have asked them to do, then we do have the legal rights to do that work and recover the cost for that. And this covenant does bind to the property in perpetuity because we need something to be in place that allows us to enforce compliance for the life of the development. And in New South Wales, well, in Blacktown Council, this is given legal effect through the Conveyancing Act 1919, Division 4. Now, in relation to the restriction on the use of land, this is looking at what property owners can't do due to their system. And so again, there's a screenshot of it on the page right now. However, at the bottom, it gives a definition to a WSUD system again, just making sure everyone understands what this legal document is in relation to. It prevents owners from doing anything that will reduce the performance of the WSUD system. So that's about not like damaging or building upon the different assets to make sure that they are actually working. And again, it binds to the property in perpetuity, just so that we have the ability to enforce compliance for the life of the development. And again, given legal effect under the Conveyancing Act. Now, another important thing for this is to determine the funding for a program like this. So for the program to work, funding is required. So does a current funding option exist? Maybe something within the council, maybe within the state, there could be some sort of opportunity to get some funding that could go towards this. Or maybe you would need to request for more funding. So maybe that's a discussion that will need to be had with more senior people within a council or organization. And so the summary of the actions is basically to firstly determine the organizational interest, figure out if the council or organization is really willing to support right now to implement a WSUD compliance program. Secondly, determine the type of program. What assets will it look at? What properties will it look at? Who will be running the program? So those sorts of questions. Then determine the development process. So figure out how development occurs within the organization so that you can, when you get to collecting data and implementing the program, you know who you need to work with to do that sort of work. Next, collect WSUD data, recommending to do that as soon as you can, and so that you have the data you need when you implement a WSUD compliance program at whatever date you end up doing that. Next would be to review your conditions of consent, understand what you kind of have legally imposed on properties right now, on developments at the moment, and figure out where you could maybe build upon or use in your own approach of implementing a WSUD compliance program. Determine your legal options, so whether that's basing them off of conditions of consent or covenants, acts, legislation, or whatever else you have the ability to use, and also determine the funding, so figure out where the money is going to come for the program. And so kind of what can you do, or what will be happening while this program is, I guess, loading? So we will continue to do our best to give updates on our progress and experiences throughout the trial. So doing events and webinars like this, or going up on podcasts, or doing talks, or even through our LinkedIn. So I am doing kind of a weekly post about WSUD. And so that's a way you can find out more information. We will also be working towards creating material for the industry that can help. So that's the manual I was talking about and the process map that I'll be working on. And so hopefully that can give councils an understanding of how Blacktown does what we do, so that it's easier to copy and take ideas from our program. And then, so for all of you, just start exploring these actions and see what you want to do and get in touch if you have questions. I'm always happy to have a chat on the phone, through LinkedIn, or another way if that's preferred. And so that's the end of the presentation, and I'm about to do questions. However, if you have questions after today, you can always reach out to my team at WSUD at blacktown.newsouthwales.gov.au or through LinkedIn if you want to do it that way. I would also like to say a special thanks to Ben Penaluric and Andrew Thomas for their contributions to this program over the past few years, and all those who came before me at Blacktown. And if anyone's interested in, I guess, another talk, I am doing one at the end of November at the 2022 ALA conference, which will be looking at a bit more of kind of the more details behind this program, the processes, and a bit more in depth about the legal framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Amazing presentation. I've heard it a few times now, but it's always got some good punches in there. Just a reminder, folks, if you have any questions you'd like to ask Daniel today, please put them in the Q&A. Obviously, he's giving you the option there of contacting him separately, but I'm sure whatever question you have, probably 80 other people would like to hear the answer to as well. So question straight off the bat from Aaron Smith. Greetings, Aaron, how are you? Aaron asks Daniel, do Blacktown restrict the types of WSUD elements available for development to create ease for future lot owners?
So within Blacktown, we do have a process of approving the types of assets that are allowed within the council. And so I guess that is kind of restricting it a bit if there is certain elements. I'm not super involved in the process of approving or the different types of assets that Blacktown accepts. So I'm not really the best person to talk on that, but we do have a list of assets we do approve, and I would assume that there is some sort of consideration to that.
Yeah, cool. A question from Martin asks, what does success look like and how do you measure it?
Yeah, so I would say success would be depending. So yeah, at the moment we're at a trial, so we don't really have success right now because we're in the process of it. But I would say that it would be people reporting to us and that their assets are being maintained properly, so they're maintaining it in the correct way and at the appropriate frequency and reporting to us. So that's kind of what compliance is, but I guess success is another word for that. And so yeah, we would be measuring that as a percentage of people or properties that are doing the right thing that way.
Yeah, cool. A question from, apologies for the mispronunciation, Vasiliki. They say, great presentation. Please, could you tell me your opinion about checking the performance of rain gardens by the use of infiltration tests and water quality tests? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's probably a bit more technical than what I'm used to. And so I'm not sure if maybe Brad will have a comment on that. But I do think it's important to be making sure that assets are working, and I'm not too sure how frequently that should be occurring, but I would say that, yeah, they should be being tested at some sort of frequency to make sure that they are performing appropriately. Yeah,
cool. I can provide some additional commentary on that, recognizing it is still your webinar, Daniel, so I don't want to steal your thunder. Okay. But yeah, the infiltration test will certainly help test the functionality of the bioretention system or rain garden in basically testing how quickly it may drain at a point in time. So that does give an indication as to its function. Obviously, if it's not draining at all, probably indicates that it's not working very well at all. Water quality testing, I think it's pretty seldom that bioretention systems are tested. We did a webinar on this topic maybe a year ago about assessing the performance data on bioretention systems, and I'd encourage you to look at that one. But it's very difficult to do it on all sites, obviously. But having said that, I know Blacktown City Council have recently initiated a 5-year monitoring program looking at about half a dozen bioretention systems. And so, look, I guess, so that testing is being undertaken. So stay tuned for the results on that one. But yeah, so certainly infiltration tests don't actually prove that it works, but it certainly helps provide indication as to its function. A question from Vicky Hart. Vicky asks, what does the reporting requirement look like for property owners? And is there appropriate independent companies able to provide this service in the market?
Yeah. So the reporting requirement is we have developed a reporting templates that are available within our WSUD inspection maintenance guidelines. And so that report looks at each different functional component of the asset types that we have accepted or are looking at. And so we required that to be filled out by an appropriately qualified maintenance contractor. And so there are organizations out there. However, I guess at the moment, there might not be a lot of them that have the equipment and the expertise to do all different assets. And that's because this is an emerging market, I guess, because maintenance enforcement hasn't really been happening. So there hasn't been that demand. However, going forward with programs like this across Australia, hopefully this will lead to that demand and leading to more organisations being there to do that work.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, another question from Vasiliki. Could you please share the previous experience you've had with water quality testing? Was this previous webinar recorded? Yes, it was. I'll send you the link in the chat, but it's based under the oceanprotect.com.au/webinar, and it was a webinar called "Does Buyer Retention Actually Work?" But I can send you the direct link as well if you'd like. Question from Matthew Starr. Matthew asks, how did private developers initially respond to these compliance requirements? Was there pushback on legally?
Yeah, so for this, we have had this program in place for 10 years. I've only been part of it for 3.5 years. So there had been conditions that have been in place for a while that were, I guess, similar to the new ones we've come up with. But the reality, I guess the thing is our conditions have only been put in place for about a year now. So it's still kind of too early to kind of get that reaction to see how developers respond to those at the moment.
Yeah, but I guess how have site owners even responded? Like obviously this is just a trial for about 100 industrial sites, I think, at this stage, but how have the responses been so far? Because you've sent letters and phone calls and had chats and whatever. What's the general response?
Yeah, so a lot of people were not aware that they had assets on their property is kind of the one thing that is conveyed a lot, or that they didn't know they had to be doing stuff to it. And so it is a bit of, I guess, people were not aware about this. And I think that is because of the fact that a lot of people don't understand WSUD, and that is something that people need to be working on educating and engaging with. And so that's where we're trying to change things and trying to engage earlier on. So as soon as a property is bought, we try to get involved so that they are aware that there are assets and there are requirements. Because if you have this property and you've been there for 20 years and you didn't know you had these requirements, a bit more of a shock at the moment. But for the properties that have been, I guess, owned for a shorter time, it's not, I guess, as much of a shock maybe, but again, it's going to vary from different property to property. At the moment, we're just looking at industrial properties, so they're a bit more, I guess, on top of it. They're aware of what's on the property because they have people to manage that. However, it will be interesting when we are enforcing this a bit more if we get to the point of residential and that sort of property, because that'll be a bit of a different situation.
Very different, yeah. And just in terms of timeframes, when do you think that enforcement will commence? Like, so councils are currently a bit of an educational and sort of softly promoting and educating and incentivizing compliance, but when do you start knocking on doors and issuing fines?
Yeah, so we've come up with a whole model of how we do compliance, and so I have shared that at previous presentations, and I'll be sharing that at the conference at the end of November. And basically, we give them a couple of chances to do the right thing. And if that's not done correctly, then we will be doing compliance inspections and looking at the legal ways we can enforce compliance then. So with it being very, very early on in this trial, we haven't really got to the point of enforcing. However, within this trial, that could be the process of trying the different enforcement methods. So
Yeah, so I think that might actually answer Sam. I think there's a question from Sam Budden who asks, how often does council have to undertake the rectification work and recoup costs? Currently, you haven't had to do that just yet because there has been no enforcement. So I might go another question from Aaron Smith. Aaron asks, how do owners in Blacktown submit reports? Do you have an available app or submit via council website or something else?
So that is something that I would like to be working towards. We haven't got that at the moment. At the moment, it is just via email. So they have the reports and they fill them out, and then they submit that to our team's email, the one on the screen right now. But I do recognize the benefits of doing online reporting, and that is something we'll be working towards, and something that we have had some discussions about.
Another question from Vasiliki. They ask, please, what kind of governance model do you think could be used to check the operational level and maintenance of WSUD in private realms? I guess is this it, the WSUD compliance program?
Well, yeah, that's probably our program, because there's nothing, I'm not aware of anything else kind of like what we're doing.
Cool. A question from Carr asks, I suppose the maintenance work shall need to be undertaken by accredited contractors. Who are qualified to do the works, and how to become accredited? Yeah,
so at the moment, I guess the best qualification, well, it's not really, the best training out there is the Stormwater New South Wales Operation and Maintenance Manual Training. And so that's a day course. And so that does look at the different maintenance based off their maintenance manual that they've developed. So that is only looking at proprietary assets, but that is the best available thing at the moment. But accreditation is something that we've considered, and maybe at a later date, something we would be working towards. I'm not sure.
It does seem odd that there's no accreditation process for the maintenance of stormwater treatment assets. There's a gap certainly for someone to fill in the not too distant future. Another question that often gets asked is just in terms of resources. So recognising that Blacktown City Council are almost the fastest growing area in Australia, I think. Have you got an indication as to the sort of the resource requirements that a council may need to initiate and implement a program such as this?
Yeah, so I guess we haven't really got to that point of figuring out how much it's going to cost other councils. For us, we have 2 full-time people and have a bit of extra to work on projects around the program. However, the hope is that we do have, I guess, more resourcing in Blacktown with a lot of development happening. So we are looking to be sharing our materials and processes, and that's why I do these events, because I recognize the, I guess, privilege we have. So we want to be sharing and helping the industry along with us, because we do recognize there are smaller councils, there are councils that don't have the same amount of resourcing and capacity to do this sort of work.
Yeah, cool. And look, there was a question in relation to legal, I guess, requirements for stormwater treatment assets. We actually covered this in a recent webinar, and I've just included a link in the chat. The recording and slides are there, and it's basically discussed right at the get-go. The webinar was called Law and Order for the Maintenance of Stormwater Treatment Assets. Long story short, it is, to the best of my knowledge, illegal to not maintain stormwater treatment assets. The legislation does vary from state to state, but in New South Wales, which is where Blacktown City is, it is illegal under the Environmental Operations Protection Act. I think off the top of my head, section 116 and 120. And I spoke to a New South Wales EPA representative, and they said, yep, that is indeed correct. It is illegal to not maintain stormwater treatment assets. So there is existing legislation to ensure that these assets should be appropriately maintained. It's just that lacking that enforcement of legislation. So that's what Blacktown City Council are looking to facilitate in this regard. If there's no further questions, I'll give people, if you've got a burning question you'd like to ask Daniel before we bid each other adieu, please do so now. But obviously, if you'd like to touch base with Daniel and asking questions directly, please feel free to do so. He's been generous enough to give his contact details on the screen there. And obviously, if you can get along to the AELERT conference in late November, early December in Sydney, might be worthwhile coming along too. But look, thanks so much for everyone who's attended today. If there's no further questions, and a special thank you obviously to Daniel for giving up his time and expertise to share his amazing knowledge with. And I certainly, I'm optimistic that this program, it's first of its kind, but it's a really great program, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it progresses and evolves in time, and ideally spread across the country. So it's obviously an enormous need in Australia and beyond to ensure the appropriate maintenance of assets. So, and this program is definitely helping in that regard. So thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for coming along. Thank you, Daniel. Amazing job once again, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Cool, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.